James Steele was born June 25th, 1826 in Kirkconnell, Scotland. When he came of age, he became a civil engineer and worked in various places around Scotland and England. He married Elizabeth Wiley, who was reported to have introduced him to the gospel. He was baptized Leeds, England, April 17, 1849. Presumably, later that same spring, he visited his sister Anne and her husband John and bore his testimony of the restoration to them. John would later describe how he, quote, had become disgusted with the whole lot of religions and would have become an infidel to all religion if not for the testimony of that young man, my brother-in-law, James Steele, who, quote, plucked me out as a brand from the fire. I do not think the testimony of anyone else on earth could have had the same weight with me. Good, honest soul, he said. Well, James and Elizabeth desired, like so many others, to answer the call and come and build up Zion in the Rocky Mountains. They answered that call. They left England and came to Iowa City, and then left Iowa City in July 1856 as part of the Martin Handcart Company. You know the story. Snow came to them when they were still more than 300 miles from the Salt Lake Valley, bringing with it an attendant train of exposure, starvation, suffering, and death. James Steele made it through the last crossing of the Platte and the ordeal of Devil's Gate and Martin's Cove, but finally, November 10th, 1856, at a place called Bitter Creek, appropriate, James Steele passed away. Steele family records say, quote, he had literally starved to death, giving all his food to his children and wife. He probably realized help truly was there for his family, and he was able to let go and move on. He held on until he knew for sure they would be cared for. He was buried at Bitter Creek. End of quote. James Steele died without reaching the Zion of his dreams. Elizabeth and her two sons, James Ephraim and William, did make it on to Salt Lake. In time, Elizabeth married David Wood, one of the rescuers of the Handcart people, and they had 3 more children. 29 years later, March 17th, 1885, James Ephraim Steele arrived at a remote frontier settlement called Eagle Rock. From Eagle Rock, he continued on to the east and filed a claim on 160 acres near Sand Creek. It looked good. He built a log cabin on it and then went back to Utah to settle up his affairs. Now, about the middle of August 1885, James went back to his claim. To his dismay, the creek had dried up along with everything else. Everything looked desolate and so discouraging. Nothing but sagebrush for as far as he could see, not a single house or tree in sight. Presumably, James was a little discouraged. He sat around for several days, discouraged enough, he didn't even unpack his wagon. And then he said, quote, one day while sitting on the ground with my back leaning up against the wagon tongue, I went to sleep. And during my sleep, I saw this country in a most beautiful, flourishing condition. In my sleep, the sagebrush disappeared, and instead I saw farms everywhere. And I woke up and said, now I'm ready to unload. I hadn't unloaded up to that time, and I never felt, he said, from then to the present time, that I ever wanted to go back. meaning to Utah. Well, less than a year later, James was called as bishop of the newly organized ward in that area. He would serve for many years as bishop, stake president's counselor, and eventually as the first stake president. And not only that, he served 3 terms in the legislature and in numerous other civic capacities. And one last thing. James felt that a town should be established in the area of his vision. So he bought another 160 acres out of his own pocket and laid out a town site. And then he sold the lots to the people who wanted to come just at cost, making no profit. And thus came the community of Iona, Idaho, one of the most heavenly corners of Zion that exists on this earth. Out of the labors of a faithful son, the hopes and dreams of the Father were fulfilled.